There are mornings in the American West when the sunlight does not bring life, but instead shines upon death. In Red Hollow, a small frontier town surrounded by dry, barren land, today was one such morning. From the break of dawn, townsfolk from ranches, saloons, and dusty trails gathered at the main square, not for trade, nor for festivity. They had come to witness an execution. The church bell tolled heavily, each slow strike echoing across the square like a death knell. On a sturdy oak platform stood a young man, wrists bound tightly behind his back. His face was pale, but his eyes wide. Not with fear, but with burning injustice. His name was Daniel Whitmore, only 19 years old. Today he had been sentenced to hang for the murder of Abram Kincaid, the wealthiest and most powerful landowner in the region. No one in the crowd dared raise their voice in protest. Everyone knew the Kincaid family controlled nearly every corner of Red Hollow, from farmland and storehouses to the bank itself. It was whispered that even the courts and the sheriff's office bent to their will. And when Abram Kincaid was found dead, there had to be someone to blame. By cruel fate, that someone was Daniel. Beneath the gallows, a woman collapsed into the dust. Dressed in a worn black dress, her silver-streaked hair wild, her hands trembling. She was Eleanor Whitmore, a widow who had lost her husband in a mine explosion a decade earlier. Now she was losing her only son. Her voice cracked the heavy air like a blade. "My boy is innocent. Daniel never killed anyone. You all know it." The townsfolk shifted uneasily, but none spoke. Farmers lowered their heads. Women clutched their children tighter. Young men turned away, unwilling to meet her eyes. No one dared challenge the power that ruled their town. In Red Hollow, truth was often bent until it fit neatly into the pocket of the powerful. At the edge of the platform stood Sheriff Abel Ross, arms folded, eyes scanning the scene. His face was carved from stone, cold and expressionless. He had a reputation as a man who enforced the law without mercy. Yet to the keen observer there was something flickering in his eyes, not conviction but hesitation. Perhaps guilt. The old judge, voice trembling yet firm, read aloud, "Daniel Whitmore, you stand convicted of the murder of Abram Kincaid. The punishment is death by hanging, to be carried out today, here in the town square of Red Hollow." The square fell silent. Only the ragged breathing of the horses and the rattling of a coffin wagon echoed through the air. Eleanor raised her tear-soaked face, her eyes burning with desperation. "Don't do this! Daniel is innocent. Abram's blood was spilled by another hand. You are about to kill a child unjustly." Daniel tried to turn despite the ropes cutting into his wrists. He locked eyes with his mother, his voice soft but steady. "Don't cry, Mother. I am not afraid. I know the truth will be revealed one day." The words cut into Eleanor's heart like a blade. She crumpled to her knees, clawing at the hardened earth. Sheriff Ross turned his face away, his jaw tight as though choking back a truth he dared not speak. The executioner tightened the noose around Daniel's neck. The crowd held its breath. The church bell tolled again, merciless and hollow. And then, at the edge of the square, a figure appeared, a lone rider cloaked in a dust-worn coat astride a black horse. He halted, his steely gray eyes sweeping across the scene. No one in Red Hollow recognized him, yet something in his gaze sent a chill rippling through the crowd. His name was Jonah Price, a man who once owed his life to Eleanor's late husband, and he had not come to Red Hollow by chance. He carried with him a past drenched in shadows and a secret that Sheriff Abel Ross had buried for over 20 years. As silence gripped the town and the rope tightened around Daniel's throat, Jonah's eyes gleamed like steel in the morning sun. One question burned in his mind, and now it is the question for you. the listener. Can a grieving widow and a stranger with a haunted past stand against a town ruled by greed and deceit? Or will Red Hollow claim yet another innocent life? The rope tightened around Daniel's neck, and the crowd braced itself for the sheriff's signal. Yet before the executioner could step forward, the silence of the square was broken. A deep, steady voice rang out across the crowd. "Hold it!" Heads turned. Dust swirled as Jonah Price dismounted his horse, boots thudding against the dry earth. His movements were deliberate, calm, like a man who had stared down death before and didn't fear it now. He adjusted the brim of his hat and walked toward the gallows, every eye fixed on him. Sheriff Ross's hand instinctively went to his revolver. "Who the hell are you, stranger?" Jonah's eyes flicked up to Daniel, then down to Eleanor, still weeping in the dirt. His jaw tightened. A man who doesn't like seeing a boy hang for another man's crime. A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd. The tension in the square coiled tighter, every second stretching long and heavy. Sheriff Ross narrowed his eyes. "This trial's over, stranger. Verdict's been passed. Law says he hangs." Jonah took a slow step forward, boots scraping across the wooden boards of the gallows. "Law?" His voice was low, steady, but sharp as a knife. "Or Kincaid's gold." The crowd stirred uneasily. Farmers glanced at one another, whispers darting like sparks. Everyone knew the Kincaid family's money held sway here, but no one had ever dared say it aloud. Ross's face hardened. "You'd best turn around and ride out before you find yourself on the wrong end of a rope, too." Jonah stopped just feet from Daniel, his eyes locking with the boy's. Daniel's lips parted, his voice trembling. "I didn't kill him. I swear." "I know," Jonah interrupted softly. Eleanor's tear-streaked face lifted in shock. You believe him?" Jonah didn't answer. Instead, he turned to face the sheriff, his voice carrying for all to hear. "I want to see the evidence, the proof that tied this boy to the killing. If you're so certain, let's show the town what justice looks like." Ross hesitated. For the first time, cracks showed in his stone facade. His jaw twitched. His hand lingered near his revolver. The judge shifted nervously. We had witnesses. They saw Daniel leaving Kincaid's barn that night, covered in blood." Jonah tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "And did anyone see him with a weapon, with Abram's body? Or just a boy running scared because someone made sure he'd be found in the wrong place at the wrong time?" Whispers grew louder, the townsfolk exchanging uneasy looks. Sheriff Ross barked, "Enough! This is finished. The boy hangs now." But before Ross could give the order, Jonah stepped closer to the executioner, his voice low but commanding. "Touch that lever and you'll answer to me." The executioner froze. His gloved hand trembled. Sheriff Ross's revolver cleared leather in a heartbeat, the barrel aimed squarely at Jonah's chest. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Mothers shielded their children. Men reached for weapons but hesitated. Jonah didn't flinch. His gray eyes burned into Ross's. "Go on, Sheriff. Pull that trigger. Show your town who you really serve." For a moment it seemed certain blood would spill right there on the gallows. Then from the far side of the square a voice shouted, "Wait!" All eyes turned as a young man shoved through the crowd, his face pale, his clothes torn. His hands shook as he held up a piece of cloth, blood-stained, filthy. I found this in the Kincaid barn," he cried. "It ain't Daniel's. It belongs to—" He didn't finish. A gunshot cracked like thunder, echoing across the square. The young man crumpled, blood spreading across his shirt. The crowd screamed, scattering. Jonah spun, drawing his revolver with the speed of a rattlesnake. Smoke curled from the rooftop of the saloon. A shadowy figure ducked back, rifle in hand. "Sniper!" someone shouted. Panic erupted. People ran for cover. Eleanor shrieked, clutching her son's name into the dust. Jonah's voice cut through the chaos. They're killing anyone who gets too close to the truth. Daniel's face twisted in terror. Sheriff Ross stood frozen, sweat running down his brow. And Jonah Price knew in that moment that Red Hollow's corruption ran deeper than anyone dared imagine. But if the town wanted a war, they had just declared it. Chaos swallowed Red Hollow Square. Mothers dragged children into alleyways, men overturned wagons for cover, horses reared in panic. The young man who had tried to speak lay motionless in the dust, crimson spreading beneath him. His blood was the only honest testimony left behind. Jonah Price knelt beside the fallen witness for a brief moment. His gray eyes hardened, his jaw clenched. He had seen too many good men silenced by bullets, but never had it stung this sharply. This boy had stepped forward for justice and was murdered for it. Sheriff Ross barked orders, his revolver still raised. "Everyone back, stay down. Jonah Price, drop your weapon now." But Jonah didn't move. He slowly stood, dust clinging to his coat, his revolver steady in his hand. His voice carried above the screaming crowd. "You shot an innocent boy to keep your secrets. How many more have you buried, Ross?" The sheriff's face flushed with fury. "I didn't order this," he shouted, though the words rang hollow. Sweat trickled down his temple. He scanned the rooftops, but the rifleman had already vanished like a phantom. Eleanor's cry pierced the air. She crawled to her son's feet, clutching Daniel's ankles as if her grip could anchor him to life. "Please, somebody help us. Don't let them kill my boy." Jonah strode toward the gallows, placing himself between Daniel and the sheriff. "If you hang this boy now," Jonah growled, "then every soul in this town will know you serve the Kincaids, not the law." Ross's revolver wavered, his jaw clenched tight. Behind him, Judge Holloway shouted, his voice breaking with panic. "Oh, Sheriff, stop this. We'll have a riot on our hands." The crowd was no longer silent. Whispers turned into shouts. Men cursed the Kincaid's name under their breath, emboldened by Jonah's defiance. For the first time, doubt cut through fear. "Enough!" Ross roared. He shoved his revolver back into its holster. "The execution is postponed until further notice." Gasps rippled through the square. Eleanor collapsed, sobbing with relief. Daniel sagged against the ropes, his young shoulders trembling. But Jonah's expression remained grim. He knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Postponed was not the same as saved. Ross pointed at Jonah, his voice venomous. "You. I don't know who you are or why you've come to Red Hollow, but you've just made yourself a dangerous enemy. You've got until sundown to ride out of town. After that, I can't promise you'll live to see another dawn." Jonah holstered his revolver, his gaze never leaving the sheriff. "I've faced worse than you, Ross. And I didn't ride into Red Hollow to leave empty-handed." As the square emptied, Jonah helped Eleanor to her feet. She clutched his arm, her eyes pleading. "Why? Why are you doing this for us? You don't even know my son." Jonah's eyes softened for the first time. "I knew your husband. Years ago in Kansas. He saved my life. Said a man only lives truly if he fights for someone else. I owe him more than I can ever repay." Eleanor's lips trembled. "Then you'll save Daniel." Jonah glanced back at the sheriff, now surrounded by deputies, his jaw tight with rage. His voice was a low vow. "I'll save him, or I'll drag every Kincaid and Ross into the dust where they belong." That night, Red Hollow didn't sleep. Windows were shuttered, lamps dimmed, whispers carried on the wind. Somewhere in the dark, the hired gun who had fired the shot sipped whiskey and counted his pay. Somewhere else, the Kincaids plotted how to silence Jonah Price before he tore their empire apart. And inside a small, dim-lit jail cell, Daniel Whitmore sat with chains on his wrists, staring at the stone wall. His mother's cries still echoed in his ears. He whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the stranger who had risked everything to stand in front of him. Outside, beneath the endless desert sky, Jonah Price sat by a lantern cleaning his revolver. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, never left the sheriff's office. He knew blood had already been spilled. And before this was over, Red Hollow would drown in it. The night air in Red Hollow was heavy, filled with whispers of fear. Lamps burned low behind shuttered windows. No one dared speak too loudly, not when the Kincaid family's reach stretched into every corner of town. But Jonah Price didn't care about whispers. He moved through the shadows like a wolf, his gray eyes alert, his revolver never far from his hand. He wasn't here to run. He was here to find the truth. He started where all corruption leaves its trail, the saloon. The music had died hours earlier, but a handful of drifters and gamblers lingered, their laughter brittle, fueled more by fear than joy. Jonah stepped inside, his boots striking the wooden floor with deliberate weight. Conversations faltered. All eyes turned. At the bar, the saloon keeper swallowed nervously. "Evening, stranger." "Evening," Jonah replied, sliding a coin across the counter. "I'm looking for a man, the one who fired that rifle today." The room went still. One man shifted in his chair, another spat into the sawdust on the floor. Nobody spoke. Jonah leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "You point me the wrong way, I'll know. You keep quiet, and maybe the next bullet won't find you instead." A shaky hand pointed toward the back door. Jonah followed, stepping into the alley where the stench of whiskey and gunpowder lingered. A figure slumped against the wall, nursing a bottle. His rifle lay across his lap, the hired gun. Jonah's revolver was out before the man could blink. "Drop it!" The gunman's eyes widened. He let the rifle fall, raising his hands. "Easy now, mister. I was just doing a job." "Whose job?" Jonah's voice was flat. The man licked his lips. "Ross paid me to keep the boy quiet. Said there was a risk someone might talk about what really happened to Abram Kincaid." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "And what really happened?" The gunman swallowed hard. "Wasn't Daniel. Boy's innocent. Abram was shot in his own study by someone who wanted him gone. They dragged Daniel into it 'cause he was easy to blame." Jonah's grip tightened on his revolver. "Who pulled the trigger?" The man hesitated. Fear flickered across his face. Then, before he could answer, a single gunshot echoed down the alley. His chest burst red and he slumped forward, dead. Jonah spun, catching a glimpse of a shadow darting across the rooftops, another hired killer. Another piece of the truth buried under gunfire. He holstered his revolver, teeth clenched. They were erasing every witness one by one, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. He crouched beside the dead gunman and pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Blood smeared across the ink, but the writing was still legible. Jonah unfolded it under the lantern light. It was a letter addressed to Sheriff Ross, signed with a bold L.K., Luther Kincaid, Abram's eldest son. The letter was short, but damning. "Father's days are numbered. When he's gone, the land, the bank, and the railroad contracts will all be mine. Make sure Whitmore takes the fall. Pay off anyone who asks questions." Jonah's eyes burned as he read the words. Abram Kincaid hadn't been murdered by an outlaw or a poor ranch hand. He'd been killed by his own blood, his son, and Sheriff Ross had been the one to cover it up. He folded the letter and slipped it into his coat, his mind racing. If the town saw this, the Kincaid empire would crumble, but to bring it to light, Jonah would have to survive the night and the storm that was coming. As he stepped back onto the empty street, the church bell tolled midnight. Somewhere behind the sheriff's office, Daniel Whitmore sat chained, unaware that the key to his freedom now rested in Jonah's hands. And at the edge of town, in a mansion lit by golden lamps, Luther Kincaid raised a glass of whiskey, unaware that his secret had already begun to bleed into the dust. Jonah Price tightened his coat against the cold wind. He had the truth now, but truth alone was never enough in Red Hollow. He'd need guns, grit, and allies. Because come morning, the war for justice would begin. Dawn broke over Red Hollow like a blade of fire, painting the desert in shades of blood and ash. The town stirred restlessly, sensing the storm about to descend. Whispers had traveled through the night, rumors of corruption, murder, and betrayal. By sunrise, the gallows was no longer just a scaffold of wood. It was a powder keg waiting to ignite. Jonah Price stood at the edge of the square, his revolver at his hip, his coat heavy with the letter that could bring down the Kincaids. Beside him, Eleanor clutched her son Daniel, who had been released under Jonah's protection after a daring midnight break from the jailhouse. The boy's wrists were raw from shackles, but his spirit burned with a mix of fear and defiance. Sheriff Ross emerged from his office, flanked by deputies. His face was pale, but his jaw was set like iron. And behind him, striding with the arrogance of a king, came Luther Kincaid. Dressed in fine black with a gold watch chain glinting in the morning light, he looked less like a grieving son and more like a man claiming his throne. The square filled quickly. Farmers, ranchers, mothers with children pressed close, their eyes darting between Jonah and the sheriff. Everyone knew something was about to break. Jonah's voice rang out steady and sharp. "People of Red Hollow, you were told Daniel Whitmore murdered Abram Kincaid. That was a lie. I have proof." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Luther's smirk faltered. Ross's hand twitched toward his revolver. Jonah pulled the folded letter from his coat, holding it high. "This letter, written by Luther Kincaid himself, orders Abram's death and the framing of Daniel. The sheriff was paid to bury the truth." Shouts exploded. Some cursed the Kincaid's name, others demanded to see the letter. Eleanor's sobs turned into cries of vindication. Daniel lifted his chin for the first time, hope flickering in his eyes. But Luther only laughed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think a piece of paper proves anything? You think these sheep will take the word of a drifter over mine?" Jonah's reply was cold as steel. "Then let's settle it the old way, you and me, Luther, here, now. Winner walks away, loser feeds the crows." The square went silent. The challenge hung in the air like a noose. Duel by gun, frontier justice no one could deny. Luther's smirk returned, though his eyes flickered with unease. "You're a fool, Price. But if it's blood you want, you'll get it." They faced each other in the dust, 20 paces apart. Sheriff Ross barked, "Enough of this madness!" But no one moved. The crowd wanted truth, and truth in Red Hollow came at the end of a gun barrel. The wind held its breath, hands hovered over holsters. Eleanor clutched Daniel's arm, whispering prayers through trembling lips. The church bell tolled once, twice. On the third strike, both men moved. Jonah's hand blurred, his revolver clearing leather in a flash of steel. Luther's shot cracked, splintering wood by Jonah's shoulder. Jonah's bullet struck true, tearing through Luther's chest. The Kincaid heir staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing into the dust. Gasps and shouts erupted. The tyrant of Red Hollow lay dead. Sheriff Ross drew his revolver, but Jonah was faster. His second shot shattered Ross's gun, sending it spinning into the dirt. Deputies froze, unsure where their loyalty lay. Jonah strode forward, his revolver steady. He pressed the letter into the hands of Judge Holloway. "Read it. Let every man and woman here know the truth." The judge's voice trembled as he read aloud the damning words. When he finished, the crowd roared, not in fear but in fury. Years of silence cracked. Men shouted for justice, women wept, children clung to mothers. The Kincaid's empire had fallen in a single morning. Ross dropped to his knees, the weight of his betrayal finally crushing him. Deputies stripped him of his badge. The law he had twisted now turned on him. Eleanor clutched Jonah's arm, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my boy. You saved us all." Jonah holstered his revolver, his eyes scanning the horizon. "No, ma'am. I just gave this town the chance to save itself." As the sun rose higher, Daniel stood tall beside his mother. The rope meant for his neck now swung empty in the wind. For the first time, the boy smiled. Jonah Price mounted his horse. He tipped his hat to Daniel, to Eleanor, and to the town he had freed. "Remember this day," he said. "Justice doesn't come cheap, but it's worth every drop of blood." And with that, he rode west, his figure shrinking into the desert light. Behind him, Red Hollow began to breathe again, not as a town shackled by fear, but as a place reborn in truth. In a harsh frontier town like Red Hollow, justice did not rest in papers or in the hands of those in power, but in the courage of those willing to stand when an entire community was silenced by fear. Jonah Price, a wanderer scarred by the past, proved that it takes only one person, one voice, to break the silence, and a whole town can reclaim justice. This story is not just a memory of the American West. It mirrors our world today. In modern society, we often find ourselves like the people of Red Hollow, silent before injustice, bowing to authority, or believing our voices can't make a difference. But the truth is this: sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to speak, one person willing to act, and silence will shatter, awakening an entire community. We may not face guns or powerful families like the Kincaids, but each day we face choices to turn away or to stand for what is right. Whether at work, in our families, or in our communities, a voice of truth can rescue one life, lift up the vulnerable, and even transform a whole society. The lesson of Jonah Price is clear: justice never arrives by itself. It must be fought for, sometimes with pain, with courage, and with the willingness to pay a price. Yet when we look back, the cost is always worth it. In today's world, you don't need to be a gunfighter to be a hero. You only need the courage to say no to what is wrong, the strength to defend those who cannot defend themselves, and the faith that truth in the end will prevail. Just as Jonah left Red Hollow behind, leaving a town reborn in justice, each of us can leave behind a legacy, not through grand victories, but by choosing to live with integrity and standing on the side of what is right when the moment demands it.